Hello, I'm joined today by my guest Annalise at Flatfair. Annalise, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. Very busy as always, but very well.
I've heard you've been very busy, and I wanted to sort of check in and once again sort of rediscover what it is that Flatfair are doing for their agents at the moment and for the market in general. Because this is to me, a very timely solution to start looking at these things now. If you haven't ever considered it, Flatfair really does have a number of different options. So for those people that have been living under a rock, in your own words, what does Flatfair do?
So essentially, we are a deposit alternative. So we are a tool that's available for agents and landlords across the UK to basically offer a option to tenants that is opposite of a cash deposit. So the age-old kind of cash deposit is you take a 5-week deposit, you put it away in a deposit scheme, and then at the end of the tenancy, you're negotiating with the tenant to, cleaning costs, rent arrears, and then releasing what's left back to the tenant. Flatfair operates in a very different way. So our model, and we always talk about it a bit like a hotel, is that the tenant signs up to Flatfair, they pay 1 week's rent plus VAT to join our membership, and then they pay when it's time to move out. So like I said, previously, it's like a hotel. You pay to check into the hotel. If you have a drink in the bar, a meal in the restaurant, or David, if you're a total rock star and you throw the TV out the window, you would be expected to pay those charges when you left. So whether you scooted past reception and just walked out the door, or whether you went to reception to pay for those charges, you would be expected to pay. You would get an invoice for those charges with a time frame. Flatfair works very similarly in that they pay that 1 week's rent at the beginning. At the end, the agent submits any charges to our platform. The tenant can accept those charges. They can counter offer and provide their own evidence and their own reasons for not wanting to pay that sum, or they can send it to an adjudication, and either party can do that. If they feel that actually they're coming to a stalemate, there's no agreement, they can send it to an independent adjudicator who will make that decision on their behalf. So in terms of where we're at today, our product's been around for about 5 years. Deposit alternatives are not new, they're not novel. I've been around since the very beginning in my previous role, and most agents now are offering some form of deposit alternative, and if they're not, then they're losing out to their competitors.
So in terms of not offering that alternative, all the reasons for offering it in the first place is you are making properties more accessible to more people. So you are actually widening the pool of potential tenants that you have. And a lot of agents might say, well, we don't have that problem because we've got tenants coming out of our ears, and quite frankly, they're all amazing and they're all lining up to pay. But the truth is that's a very short-term view, isn't it, really? You're not necessarily helping anybody onto the ladder that wouldn't be able to get there before. And you're not necessarily doing the right job for your client either, because you've left out a whole section of the market that might be perfectly good tenants and like to stay there for much longer.
Absolutely. I think there is a misconception of deposit alternatives, or a myth that they are attracting the wrong types of tenants. They're for tenants who can't afford the rent. They are, bad tenants. And actually that is not the case. These options are there purely as a choice. So if you're not offering an element of choice to your tenants, you are essentially making them pay something that they don't have to pay with another agent that's down the road. We don't just accept anybody. I think this is another kind of myth that's in the market, is that anybody, Tim who's begging outside Greg's with pound coins is going to walk into your agency and go, I want to rent this property deposit free. And that's not the case. Agents still have this pool of opportunity. They're expanding that pool by offering a deposit alternative, but they still get to choose which tenants are going to put into that landlord's property. So it's actually giving them more tenants, it's building their database, it's getting more applications. And if anything, they can achieve a higher rental yield if they've got competing tenants. And in a market like we're in today, like you say, it's saturated with tenants. I speak to agents and they say, well, I'm fine, I've got 30 applications per property, I don't need more. Well, actually, these tenants could be your next tenants. When the market starts to dry up again, they could potentially still be looking for their next property.
Well, the reason I'm smiling is that I'm remembering our conversation that we had about a week ago, where we discussed that both you and I have both been in situations where we've been tenants before. And I asked you the question, well, when you moved into your property, where did you get your deposit from? And the truth is, very few people are in a position where they can just pull that money out of savings. It's a substantial amount of money, and that moving home has a number of different costs attached to it. And it's not just the rent, but it's all the other ancillary costs that go with it. And getting the place right and feeling sort of like you've settled in is part and parcel of making a tenant feel welcome, and also having a longer term relationship with them. If they're always trying to scrabble from day one their financial position back to where it was. So you and I discussed it, and I asked you the question, and I think we both came up with the same answer. I think I called my mum at the time and said, look, I'm moving house. I can't afford to do this all in one go. Can you help me out with a couple of £100 here and there? And effectively, amongst family members, you end up crowdfunding your deposit. And you have to go through that cycle every time you move. It's not necessarily, it doesn't feel like you ever finish asking
You never
for
get it
handouts.
back.
Yeah,
You never get it back. Yeah. And I
Um,
was in exactly the same situation as you. My mother-in-law funded our first deposit probably when we moved in together 10 years ago. And every single time we moved, we would ask her to loan it again till the previous one came out. And it was just constant cycle of putting a deposit down, returning it to my mother-in-law. And, we're out of that cycle now. But every tenant has, a source of a deposit, whether that is savings, whether that is the bank of mum and dad, which primarily it is these days, or it's short-term solutions like payday loans. And that again is becoming more commonplace, with tenants struggling to fund deposits and not having that person to fall back on, that person to ask to borrow that money from, because essentially we're all in the same boat right now. Everybody's cost of living is rising, everybody's in the same position.
So help me to sell this to a landlord. So I'm talking to a landlord. I'm selling him my services. I'm telling him that under normal circumstances I'll be asking for 5 weeks of deposit from a tenant. How and at what stage do I introduce this alternative, and what assurances do the landlords have that they're adequately protected?
I think the first flaw in how you have just pitched it to me as if I was a landlord is saying this is what we used to do and this is a new way of doing it. A lot of what our partners do is they build it into, this is what we do for you as your managing agent. We offer you, as standard, 10 weeks protection through Flatfair. Flatfair is a deposit alternative. The benefits it gives you is that you've got double the protection of a cash deposit that you've had with previous tenancies. If there's any problems at the end, Flatfair will compensate you quicker than you would be with a cash deposit, and it's a secure solution. Are you happy for us to offer it with Flatfair's no deposit? So the conversation has turned around from the old way of doing it and the new way of doing it to, this is just how we market our properties. We want to get you the best possible rental price, the best possible tenants, and we want to make sure that you're protected as well as you can be. And that can be with us and the rent guarantee product behind that as well, and giving them this protection bubble. So the way that our agents sell our product isn't as a, the property sticking, we're struggling, let's add this on. It's part of our offering. And that has become more commonplace with new partners who have come into Flatfair over the years, is that this is just what they do. And any agent you speak to today will say, well, yeah, it's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't we want to give our landlords 10 weeks worth of protection?
And for those agents that haven't yet arrived at that way of thinking, they will, we're talking in July 2022, so we're going to date this recording. But what we're seeing now is that the marketplace is starting to sort of change ever so slightly. And so that air of positivity that was there, fueled by an amazing property market for 2 or 3 years, is starting to level off ever so slightly, because we keep seeing headlines about affordability, about the cost of living, and whether or not this impacts landlords initially, it's certainly going to impact on the tenants, and therefore will then later on down the line have a knock-on effect with landlords. As agents, it would be great to be able to offer a more affordable alternative that gives everybody the protection that they need, but also really sort of allows us to talk to more potential tenants than we could have done in perhaps different markets.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a confidence thing. When I came into this sector with deposit alternatives, it was a bit of a, well, is it going to influence tenants' behaviour? Are we going to attract bad tenants? You know, what's going to happen at the end of tenancy? And we've got partners that have worked with us for years that adopt this kind of auto opt-in approach now, because they have experienced hundreds of end of tenancies. You know, they've gone through the full cycle. So it's a confidence thing. And, you know, new partners that join us are a little bit more reticent sometimes, because they're like, oh, we haven't experienced an end of tenancy, therefore we'll leave it up to our landlords. But that confidence builds over time. And like you say, there's this kind of elephant in the room about affordability, and people thinking that a deposit is an indicator of somebody's affordability, and it absolutely isn't. As we've just touched on there,
Yeah.
that deposit can come from anywhere. It doesn't tell you that this tenant's going to be a good tenant. But what does tell you they're going to be a good tenant is the referencing. And that is where, you know, we align with our partners to ensure that we are also taking on good risk in that they're a good tenant, and also the agent's taking on good risk as well.
So can anybody sort of access your services? Do I need to use your partners for credit referencing? Does it come as one package? How much of this do I need to eat?
So we actually we offer our own referencing, but we do partner with others. You've probably seen that we work with the likes of Good Lord, HomeLet, Home People, and we've got a number of integrations that can facilitate what we call one-click plan creation. But ultimately, it's offered through our network of partner agents. So an agent couldn't just log into our system today and start working with us. They have to sign a partnership agreement. They have to be trained on the product, so how to sell it and how to sell it correctly. So making sure that, you know, it is always offered as a choice to tenants, landlords, etc. And then once that happens, the tenant goes through referencing as normal. And only once you're satisfied that they are a good tenant, that they've passed referencing, or, you know, they've passed with a condition that they're satisfied, that is when they then come to us and they're introduced to Flatfair. So we work with, like I say, partner letting agents, and, you know, all the referencing suppliers on the market are fantastic. And it all comes down to the quality of the reference. Now, does it cover their affordability? Does it have a previous landlord reference in there? Does it demonstrate that they've seen their ID, for example, so that we know that they're a good standing tenant? But yeah, ultimately, we don't have a list of preferred reference providers. Some agents these days are actually bringing it back in-house. So, you know, it is something that is quite complex for agents.
Going old school on it now.
Yeah.
But what is interesting is that this shouldn't be seen as sort of a second option. You're quite right. This should be offered as part of your offering. And you are, in terms of your partner agents and the people that are your clients, just a brief glance at your website will show that you've got some pretty substantial names that are backing this, and that have been using it consistently. What's the general feedback?
To be honest, it's all about education. I think, as I say, you know, agents think they understand how the models work. They think that, you know, the end of tenancy is going to be a real pain point for them, that they've always done it this way, therefore they're going to always do it that way going forward. For us, it's all about agents who are willing to adopt change. You know, these agents that first signed up to deposit alternatives, what do we call them, your early adopters, you know, those that just get involved straight away. They don't really think too much about it. They're like, let's try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Whereas we work with partners who have the motivations to actively embrace this in their business. And, you know, we don't cherry pick our partners. We're open to everybody coming to us. But for me, I want to work with partners who are going to invest as much time and energy into getting this into their markets as I'm investing in getting them onboarded, trained, and going with us. So it's not a specific demographic of agents that we work with, but it's a demographic of agents who are wanting to do the right thing for their landlords and their tenants.
And embracing that sort of change. Talk to us just briefly about the kind of the end of the process. So when it comes to adjudication, how do you think yours compares to, say, you know, traditional adjudications that you have to go through, let's say the TDS or DPS in those kind of circumstances? Sometimes they can be quite long-winded. There can be delays in responses, and it can be months before anybody gets any money, and that's either for landlord or tenant. So it's not really the best of outcomes. Whereas I see references left for you guys by your landlords that all talk about the speed of you arriving at that decision. So just talk us through it ever so slightly.
So just to give you kind of a real life example, so say there is £500 of rent arrears and £200 worth of damages. A agent would submit their evidence on the Flatfair platform, so they itemise the charges. The tenant is then invited to review those charges. So they have 10 days to review the whole charges. So they can go and get their own evidence, they can counter offer. And in that 10 days, we have a end of tenancy case handler that is supporting those conversations. So if the tenant's not engaging with it, to prompt them, to contact them to say, look, these charges are there, they need to be reviewed, you need to, engage with them in some way. After that 10-day period is up, if the tenant has chosen not to engage, what we can do as a business is we can deem those charges as accepted. So we will say to the tenant, unless you engage with them, unless you reject them or accept them, after 10 days, they will automatically be deemed as accepted. Now, if we get to day 11 and the tenant's still not engaged with them, we've contacted them through phone, email, platform, however we can, we will then make an offer of payment to the landlord for those charges. And then we would then contact the tenants directly to recover those sums. So that's where they just don't engage. If they choose to engage and say, yes, on day 5, I accept these charges, we will then send them an invoice. So they'll say, hey, great, thank you for accepting your charges. These are the payment terms. Payment is required within 5 days. They've got 5 days to pay an invoice. And again, we fall into that cycle of if the tenant doesn't pay, then we will pay the landlord and then we will recover those sums directly from the tenant. In some instances, it's not that simple in that the tenant chooses to counteroffer, reject and say, actually, I'm not paying that £200 cleaning bill because my grandma came round on Sunday with a Henry Hoover and I think that's a professional clean. And these things do happen. And if that is the case handler will step in and say, actually, look, this is what's going to happen. It's going to go to adjudication. A third party is going to review this. And then Hamilton Fraser, who are part of My Deposits, will adjudicate independently. And it can take them up to 28 days to do that. So that is a defined time frame for them to do it. Once they have returned a decision, which on average for us is around 14 days at the moment, again, we will invoice the tenant if it's in the landlord's favour with 5 days to pay. If they haven't paid, we put the landlord back in pocket and then we contact the tenants directly again to recover those sums.
So it all seems remarkably sort of straightforward and easy to use. And I take it that the part of this is also it's creating a less hostile environment really for a tenant as well as anything else. I think one of the kind of the sore points in the lettings industry for many years is that we've always treated tenants as a means to an end. They're not our paying clients because they're not the landlord. However, and therefore they've not really had customer service or a helping hand. We've never seemed very tenant friendly as an industry. There's a sense of that starting to change, and that might even be short-sighted because a tenant of today is perhaps the buyer of tomorrow. The buyer of tomorrow is the seller of tomorrow, and you have this nurturing life cycle of events really that you need to go through. But it all starts with renting a property, and if that experience is positive with that agent, and if that agent is seen to be helping tenants to try and make sense of this process and make it more affordable, I don't think it's a bad message to be giving in this day and age, is it?
No, absolutely. And I think we don't want to dehumanize kind of end of tenancy. So, that interaction, but having it in one place is fantastic, because quite often at the end of a tenancy, it's a relationship breakdown between the agent and the tenant, the landlord and the tenant. And it's a very emotive thing. You're dealing with people's finances and their money, and, it is a very emotive situation to be in. And the age-old way of doing it for agents is emails, phones, batting calls back and forth, whereas our platform houses everything, all of your evidence, all of your communications, all of your counter offers. And like you say, everybody looks at the lifetime value of a buyer, for example, because they're tomorrow's sellers, and but very rarely do agents look at lifetime value of a tenant and incorporate that into their business model. So by taking away the big upfront costs, treating customers fairly by giving them choices, by engaging with them on a platform that gives them the opportunity to produce their own evidence and their own comments, actually provides a much better customer satisfaction point as well.
So from an agent's point of view, I'm not currently working with you, and I think this is great. We want to hit the ground running. How quickly can I sort of get onboarded, You mentioned some training there as well. So how quickly can we actually get into introducing these solutions into our businesses?
So realistically, you could offer it overnight, but that's not going to give you the best experience, and that's not going to give you your landlords and tenants the best experience. So what we recommend is you go through an onboarding experience, which can be as quick or as slow as you want it to be. So, we do a review of your existing processes to see, where you could enhance offering Flatfair. So do you have it on your market appraisal performs for your landlords? Do you have tenant application forms? Are you using online viewing platforms where you could have a box where they can select a deposit alternative as an option? And then what we do from there is we look at marketing. So how can we, help you to market this effectively? So looking at your website, looking at your social media channels, your listings, whether that's Rightmove, Zoopla on the market, how can you enhance the visibility of your offering, the fact that you offer this to tenants? And then from there, we then work with our partners to do training sessions. So we train the front end team, so your negotiators, those that are actually at the kind of the front of the office that are having the conversations. And then we move to, if you have a move-ins team, how they progress it on the platform, how they use the platform. And then we have end of tenancy, and we do that multiple times. We do it at the beginning just because the end of tenancy teams tend to want to know what's coming up the road. But then we do it again when the first end of tenancy start to come through, so that it's really fresh, that they've got the tools they need. So once all of that is in place, we generally set a launch day. So that day is the day you start calling your landlords, that you start speaking to your tenants. And then we kind of go from there, and you have a dedicated account manager who sends you weekly reports, so letting you know how you're performing. So not only how many sales are you doing, but how are your landlords, engaging with this? Are your landlords on board? And if not, why not? And what can we do to support those conversations? So it's a very relationship built process. There isn't any cost for an agent to sign up to Flatfair. Everything we offer agents is completely free. The marketing materials, whether it's physical or digital, the training, the refresher training, all of that is just part and parcel of what we do. And we want to have an ongoing relationship. It's not just another distribution channel for us. It's a relationship that we want to build with that agent. So realistically, answer to your question, you could sign up today and start selling it tomorrow. But if you wanted to do it effectively, you'd probably be looking at around 2 weeks lead time. Yeah,
no, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of ever-changing sort of markets and changing offerings, I know you guys are always looking at new and innovative things to introduce. There's lots going on behind the scenes there at Flatfair, isn't there?
There is. I think, integrations is a key one for us. Again, distribution, but also making it easier for agents to access our platform. That's one of the first things that we're looking at, is how do we remove even 2 minutes of admin from somebody accessing our platform? So that's the first thing that we're looking at. And then we have things like deposit unlocking, which has been a really, really interesting concept that we actually relaunched back end of last year, which allows existing tenants to move from a cash deposit to a Flatfair no deposit. We've seen partners absolutely embrace this. New partners have said, look, this is something we want to build into our roadmap for this year. We want to be offering this to our tenants. And that's been really exciting, because what you're doing is you're giving somebody money back that has potentially been locked away for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, we had one the other day and they'd been in there 10 years. That money had not come out for 10 years. And they were like, well, the references are out of date. We're like, 10 years of history of a good paying tenant.
You can't, no reference company in the world is going to be able to give you that insight. And in many ways, it's lovely to be able to reward somebody for being a good tenant and for building up that track record, and that, our business is as much about trust as it is about relationships. Those relationships are built on trust, and what says I trust you more than, here is some of your money back, but here is the way that we're going to make sure that everybody's adequately protected in the meantime. There must be untold thousands and thousands of pounds locked up in deposits that have been sat there for longer than they need to, if we're honest.
It's around 5 billion that is currently locked away in the 3 big schemes. So that doesn't include the likes of your unprotected deposits where they're not in a scheme. TDS, DPS, my deposits combined, you're looking at, £4 to £5 billion that's not out in the economy right now. It isn't in tenants' pockets. It's not in landlords' pockets either. It's literally sitting in a scheme,
locked in an account.
And that's scary. That's a big number.
It is. It's hugely scary. And I think when you think about what could be done with that money, and perhaps the goodwill that you're buying along the way, and the fact that nobody's legal rights are prejudiced either in all of this, to me, it makes a lot of economic sense to start really sort of embracing this attitude and the way of looking at it. So unlocking those deposits is something that's quite exciting.
Yeah, massively. And we do have eligibility. We have to have eligibility for deposit unlocking as well. But it is, our product has been designed to be inclusive, not exclusive. We look at other products on the market. If you don't pass referencing, it's a computer says no situation, because they're insured and their insurer says you have to abide by these rules. Whereas what we try to do with our product is take every single tenancy on its merit. It's not you put the figures in and it spits out no. It's put the figures in. If something's not quite right, I don't know, a tenant's got a CCJ for 150 quid from Vodafone from 2016. Does that mean they're going to be a bad tenant? No, it means they've just not paid a phone bill and maybe didn't know about it, or whatever the reason is. But we always say to our partners, if in doubt, reach out. We want to be able to help as many tenants as possible. And the only tenants that unfortunately we won't take on are tenants with significant debt. So CCJs, bankruptcy, because as I'm sure you can see, they have got a higher propensity to not pay debt. So we can't possibly take them on as a risk, because we'll pay a landlord and we're never going to get our money back. So, those cases are, for us, the only computer says no situation. But if it's a small amount, we always say to our partners, reach out.
And at the end of the day, that should also give landlords quite a bit of comfort that you're unlikely to say yes to tenants that you're not going to get your money out of at the end of the process if you need to. So you're making a very considered judgment, if you like, on who is suitable. So that criteria is really robust. Otherwise, this whole model doesn't work.
Absolutely. And it's so robust that it's still manual. We don't rely on a computer to check this information. We have we call them our unicorns in customer support. Our unicorns are there, and every single plan is verified on our end before it even leaves our system. So before it gets sent to a tenant, we manually check that, everything lines up, the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, the reference is acceptable, all the guarantors being added to the tenancy agreement, all of those compliance elements we actually manually check. And that's a big outlay for us as a business, but also it means that we're a much lower risk at the end of the tenancy of having any high risk tenants at the end.
It seems to sort of take the friction out of the whole process, and I think that there are plenty of ways that agents can embrace this and kind of work it into their offering, and not see it as a threat to traditional models. Nobody is left without protection. If anything, you're giving them an extra layer of protection that they can rely on. And so to me, it's an easy sell to landlords because you're adding value. So it's superb.
I think the other thing as well is that completely lost my trail of thought then. Completely lost what I was going to say. What was I going to say? I completely forgot. That's a nightmare.
We'll edit something in now.
There we go. Just edit something in. But yeah, it really is just kind of making sure that as an agent you are offering choice. And what I was going to say, I remembered, is that a lot of agents say to us, well, our tenants don't ask for it. Tenants don't need it. Our demographic of tenants can afford a deposit. And that is the biggest objection that we get. It's almost like, and I'm going to use a Greggs analogy, of walking into a Greggs and saying, actually, do you sell a Subway? Nobody's going to walk into Greggs and ask for a Subway because it's not advertised. They're not selling it. It's not in the shop window. Yeah. So it's really kind of keen for agents to understand is that if you're not offering it, you're not going to get asked about it. It's as simple as that. And it's an objection that we get all the time. And it's really easy to overcome because you say, look, if you're not put it in your windows, you're not talking about it. Yeah. Nobody's going to ask you for it. A tenant's going to say, I want to rent this property, but I want it deposit free. It's never going to be a conversation.
We all know that tenants have a script that they work to because they know what agents are looking for in terms of answers to questions, and they know how competitive the environment is, so that they tend to stay to whatever's safe. Nobody's ever going to, in their right mind, turn around and go, listen, do you have anything more affordable in terms of the way that you handle deposits? because they're worried that might actually start a conversation in the wrong direction. But for an agent to be able to sort of reach out and say, hey, look, you know, when renting a property off us, this is how it works. I just think you're going to appeal to more people. It's just going to instantly make you seem friendlier.
Yeah, a lot of, I mean, the way that we train our partners is to say, look, you know, this property is available with a no deposit option, or no deposit is available on this property. You've got two options. You can either pay a 5-week cash deposit, or you can become a Flatfair member, pay 1 week's rent plus VAT. This is non-refundable, but it means that you still retain access to that other 4 weeks that you would have kind of put away. And what we see on average is around 56% of tenants, and that's increasing on a monthly basis, 56% of tenants opting for a no deposit option when it is actually presented to them.
And I imagine that figure is just going to increase as the climate sort of toughens ever so slightly. We've all got costs, and we talk about affordable housing. We talk about the gaps between affordability and what people are earning. You know, when we're assessing people for mortgages, there's one scale that we use, and when we're assessing people for rent, there's another scale. But what we do know from being property managers all these years is that there are a ton of people out there that can afford to pay rent, that are great tenants, that do care about where they live. And so we don't hear so much about those stories because it's only the horror stories that sells newspapers. But out there in property world, I think it's worth nurturing those relationships with the tenants, because I do think it's short-sighted just to see them only as tenants and that's it, because I think that life cycle in terms of your business, if you're going to stay in that business for long enough, I think you'll see those tenants come back time and time again, maybe even as a landlord in the future.
I mean, we already see returning tenants. So, you know, we've got obviously returning landlords. That's kind of the bread and butter of our business. But what we offer is returning tenant discounts. So tenants that are good, well behaved. So even if there are charges, but as long as they satisfy them, we actually offer them a discount on their next membership. So we are, you know, encouraging them to return to us, to users, and not actually penalising them because there's charges. It's like, well, you've had charges, but you've paid them. We still want to welcome you back, and here's a discount to say thanks for being a good tenant last time you used us. So, you know, we are already in that cycle of, you know, influencing tenant behaviour. And what we see is that on average, less than 30% of our tenancies for our partners actually end with any charges whatsoever, you know, and that is because, I think we talked about this when we caught up, is that safety blanket of a deposit is no longer there. You know, that safety blanket that tenants have and say, oh, well, I just won't pay the last month's rent because they can just take it out of the deposit, is gone. It's yesterday's money, whereas today's money is a different conversation. So tenants are making good any damage. They're keeping their rental payments up to date because they don't want to have to carry debt onto their next property. So we are also, and I never thought I'd be able to say this, when I came into the industry, I was like, I don't know how tenants are going to behave. I honestly didn't know. Whereas now, we have the data. You know, we've got over 30,000 active tenancies in our system today, you know, and we've got hundreds of thousands that have ended over the last 5 years. And now we can evidence that it positively impacts tenant behaviour rather than negatively. And thank God for that, because the amount of agents I've brought on board, that would be a really, really bad stat.
I bet that'll be an uncomfortable conversation. But that, look, if you're looking for data and a test case, you know, 30,000 people all using this, and it works, and it's delivering value for both the agents, landlords, and tenants all at the same time. What's not to love? Give it a go. Maybe a fresh take on what you're used to. But it doesn't mean that it can't help you. I think it's going to help a lot of people along the way, and I think it will break down those barriers of communication that we sometimes have with tenants. I think that a lot of the property management issues that we have in terms of relationship management with tenants, bad relationships, start all the way at the beginning of the process, from the first minute that we meet people and we start to sort of doubt them as to whether or not they're going to be good for the money, and we make that application process as rigorous as possible. It doesn't set you off very often on the right foot. It doesn't feel like you're working together with them. And to me, this solution does part of that job. I think it breaks down those barriers.
Yeah, I mean, I still know agents who still interview tenants. They actually bring them in and interview tenants, and that's their process. They vet them internally, they interview them personally, they get to know the tenant before they've stepped foot through the door. And so there is, like you say, there are different practices. And I think, like you say, it's all about the lifetime value of that individual, and not making, preconceived ideas of you're a good tenant, you're a bad tenant. You've got the processes in place to do that. You've got your referencing, you've got your landlord history, you've got everything you need as an agent to know whether someone's a good tenant. And with deposit unlocking, we find that they're even easier for us to look at as a risk, because we can see their behavior. We don't have to look into the future, we can look into the past and see that they've been good tenants throughout their tenancy.
You've now dealt with many tenants and obviously many agents. In your experience in the sector, what do you think defines exceptional letting standards in terms of agents that are really sort of bucking the trend and real trailblazers? What are you seeing?
I would say agents who embrace change. So not change for the sake of change, but change for a positive reason. I think agents who are willing to go the extra mile for their landlords and their tenants, they are, registered, they are qualified, they are educational parts of their communities. They are giving their landlords and tenants all the information. They're part of hubs. They're inviting landlords to, open evenings, things like that, to educate them on the legislation and taking ownership. Becoming that trusted agent. What I say to agents all the time is, you can get every single landlord on board if they trust you. They instruct you to look after their property, and this is part of doing that. So for me, a gold standard is, agents who know their market, whether that's an online agent or a high street agent, agents who are willing to embrace change that, is a positive impact for both landlords, tenants, and their business, if it's going to make their teams' lives easier.
Yeah.
And those with a really high retention rate as well. And we see that with a lot of our partners. There's not really a high churn in terms of staff. And we know that because we train them. So we know that they're looking after their teams as well.
Superb. Annalise, thank you so much for giving us your time.
No problem at all. Thank you very much, David.